Death, something known throughout the world and all existence as the end of being. However, there a continuation, a different sense of surviving beyond what was known to those of the living world. Naruto Uzumaki, a boy who was known to be constantly energetic and loyal to a fault, had never thought he'd end up in the situation that he was in. Upon successfully retrieving Sasuke, who had agreed to go back to Konoha willingly before falling unconscious, Naruto was locked in the cells of the T&I unit, chakra locked away by seals and chains. His clothing was stripped from his body along with his pride. How does it feel, demon traitor, knowing that your last few hours will be spent locked away as you should be? A dark voice sneered from the other side of the metal door. What did I do wrong? You asked me to bring Sasuke back, and I did. Naruto protested, confused by the harsh response to his successful mission. You brought him back covered in cuts and bruises and injuries. You were not informed to injure the Uchiha. You were told to bring him back. The voice responded angrily, and Naruto realized he knew who the man was. Danzo, you piece of shit. When I get out of here, I'll tear you limb from limb. You can't keep me here. Naruto panicked. He realized that his life was forfeit as long as he was kept in the prison. You little shit can't do anything anymore. You are no longer a ninja of this village. You have been stripped of your hit I-8. You are to be executed upon the strike of noon. Danzo laughed on the other side of the door, leaving Naruto to sit in silence. He waited for what seemed like forever for the time of his death. Naruto-kun, a soft voice sounded from behind the door. Hinata, what are you doing here? Naruto asked, genuinely confused by the violet-haired Hyuga's presence. I came to say I'm sorry. I tried to ask my father to allow you to live. He wouldn't listen to me. I'm so sorry, the young girl cried. Naruto blinked a few times before chuckling to himself. You did what you thought would help. This is not your fault. Thank you. Naruto spoke, meaning every word he said. I want you to know you are the inspiration behind my Nindo. It's the same as yours. You were always my hero. Hinata spoke, her voice soft, but there wasn't a stutter. You will always be our friend Naruto. Another voice came from the door. Shikamaru. Who else is there? Naruto asked, tears starting to form in his eyes. Hinata, me, Shino, and Kiba. Shikamaru answered. Naruto felt the tears flowing freely down his face. You guys know what is going to happen, don't you? Naruto asked, only hearing silence for a few moments. Yes, that is why we have come here. We are saying our goodbyes and letting you know that we will always care about you. Kiba responded, you knucklehead, I can't believe you'll be leaving us all behind. Enko spoke, obviously saddened by his execution. What happened to Sasuke? Naruto found himself asking, even though he'd fought with the boy. Naruto realized that he'd broken through the jealousy he'd had and promised to help Sasuke train and become stronger. He's in the hospital. He hasn't been told about your, Kiba trailed off. They found it illogical to tell him about your impending execution. They believe that he will attempt to stop it. Shino spoke up, his voice stoic as normal, however Naruto knew he cared. It's better that he doesn't see my death. Naruto paused. He wondered why he cared about what Sasuke felt. It also occurred to him that he worried about how Sasuke would react. Shaking his head, Naruto prepared himself for death. Gaki, I am sorry. Kyuubi spoke within his mind. Not really your fault either. I guess I was prepared for it to happen either way. Naruto shrugged as best he could against the chains that bit into the skin of his wrists and neck. If I were not sealed within you, this chain of events might not have occurred. I should have taken better care of you, been less callous. As we reach our final hour together, I will properly introduce myself to you. My name is Kurama. I am the nine-tailed fox. I was sealed within your mother before you, and then within you by your father. Kurama spoke, letting Naruto know of his parentage. My father was the fourth Hokage. Naruto nearly shouted, however quieted himself down so that he was not tortured due to his noise level. Yes. And while I might curse his name, his Sochi did not deserve the life he was given. I am sorry, Naruto, Kurama repeated. Naruto forgave him, knowing that they were going to be greeting death together. Naruto, it is time. Ibiki spoke, opening the large metal door and pulling his chains to get him to follow. Naruto did so without a fight, accepting his death. Konoha had betrayed him. After all he'd done for them, he was left with nothing. The cheers of the civilians and good portion of the ninjas were louder than anything Naruto had heard in his life. The shouts of demon scum and traitor were deafening, and deep in Naruto's heart something burst. He felt anger as well as a burning passion for revenge. Fuck all of you, he shouted, adding some of Kurama's chakra to his voice, making it boom. It silenced the crowd before Naruto glanced around. They had sealed his own chakra, but not Kurama's. This village is nothing more than trash. You have betrayed me and for that you will never be forgiven.
Have you ever wondered about a different side of Naruto's world? Welcome to Ninja Seduction on Patreon. We create mature, thoughtfully written what-if Naruto stories, along with exclusive comics and premium quality audio. Our community is interactive. Members can vote in polls, share ideas, and help guide future stories. If you enjoy creative storytelling and a more grown-up ninja experience, we'd be happy to have you join us on Patreon. The link is provided in the description.
Naruto continued, making everyone other than the few he knew were loyal to him nearly collapse under the pressure of his anger. Kurama howled in his mind, fueling the hatred for the village. Konoha will rue the day for this betrayal. Naruto bellowed before looking into the eyes of his executioner. Kakashi, how fitting that the sensei who couldn't forget his past is ruining his future. My father would be so displeased with you. He's probably trying to claw his way out of the Shinigami right now to punish you for your choices. Naruto grinned like a madman, making Kakashi pause. You slander his name. Kakashi roared, broken from his shock. Within seconds, however, time seemed to stand still. Naruto had shut his eyes, looking away from his former sensei, who obviously did not care anymore, before looking straight ahead. Sasuke was attempting to force his way through the crowd, and from what Naruto could see, his eyes were filled with tears. That shocked Naruto, as he'd never expected to see Sasuke show any emotions other than contempt, as that was all he'd seen for 14 years. Naruto Uzumaki, you are hereby sentenced to death for the high crime of treason. Any final words? Ibiki sighed, showing regret in his eyes. Yeah, fuck this village. Fuck everyone who believes me to be a demon. Fuck you, Kakashi. Fuck Eve. Naruto was cut off by the sword that severed his neck. Sasuke dropped to the ground where he stood, and everyone mistook his tears of sadness for tears of joy. They believed that the blight that had been Naruto Uzumaki was gone. How wrong they were. On a separate note, to the people who have followed and favored me or this story, thank you for the support. I'm not normally a rude person, but I'm not afraid to lay the cards on the table. This is the official first chapter. I briefly touch on the fight between Ulquiorra and Ichigo, more summarizing it for the story. It picks up in detail when he arrives in the elemental nations again. Once again, this is my first story, so if it comes down to grammar and some minor errors, sorry, I'm not that great with editing my own writing. I don't own Naruto or Bleach. A resounding crash occurred as the body of one Kurosaki Ichigo collided with the ground. Do you understand now? A deep monotone voice asked as the orange-haired boy struggled to stand. Ulquiorra, the Quattro Espada, stood in front of the boy, his face lacking any emotion. No matter how similar your appearance and techniques may be to those of an Arrancar, their power is as far apart as heaven and earth. Ulquiorra, using the Hiron Kyaku to stay level with Ichigo, spoke. When a Shinigami or a human wishes to gain power, imitating hollows is an appropriate course of action. However, as it is still imitation, a human can never compare to the power of a true Arrancar. He continued, somewhat impressed at the orange-haired boy's will to live. Something about the way the boy continued to fight, even as he was close to death, brought an unknown feeling in Ulquiorra. Continuing his onslaught, even after Ichigo had forced him to release his Resurrección Segunda Etapa, Ulquiorra was faced with the girl and one of the comrades of the boy. The girl was attempting a futile effort to revive Kurosaki, while the Quincy had taken to fighting and protect his comrades. Help me, Kurosaki. The girl desperately shrieked. A moment later, a burst of Riatsu filled the air. Ulquiorra could only narrow his eyes slightly, his face still lacking emotions. The energy was surrounding the felled body of Kurosaki, who up until a moment before had been presumed as dead, and in his place was what looked like an Arrancar. Ulquiorra, who had been unmatched in his battle up to that point, was being throttled. His arm was ripped off, albeit regrown with his rapid regenerative abilities. It was then that Ulquiorra realized he'd been bested. Forced to the ground, a horned Kurosaki with his hollow mask melded to his face, long orange hair flowing behind him, placed his foot onto Ulquiorra's head, holding him down. A white cirro forming between the horns, he sighed. No mercy, I see, how very hollow-like. I don't mind, I lost to you. I no longer have any meaning, do it. He demanded, and in a flash of light, a moment later, he felt nothing of the battle he'd just suffered through. Black, that was all that surrounded him as he regained what he could assume was consciousness. Good to see that you are awake, Ulquiorra-kun. A deep voice spoke from behind him, momentarily startling him as he couldn't sense the presence with his Pesquisa. On guard, he turned to face the new opponent. Before him was a bald man wearing an elaborate kimono covered in crescent moons. The man was of medium build, a smile on his face and blue eyes. "Lower your guard. I am not here to harm you, none of you." The man amended as Ulquira sensed other Riatsu fill the air surrounding him. Standing around him were the rest of the 9 Espada. "What the fuck are we doing here? Why the fuck are we?" Grimjow snapped, easily displaying his irrational side. "I believe if we listened to what this man has to say, we would be told." Sheoloporo spoke, a grin on his face. En Neutra seemed within moments of commenting, however whatever he was going to say was lost as the man in front of them began to speak. "I have gathered you all after your deaths because you were all once one being. You were all once known as Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Each aspect of you, rage, madness, emptiness, despair, intoxication, greed, sacrifice, aging, solitude, and destruction, were all aspects that were left from the boy after he was betrayed and murdered by his village." The man explained, getting strange looks from a few of the Espada before him. "And who are you to be telling us this farce?" Barragan spoke, his gruff voice filled with disbelief. Ulquira could only agree with the older-looking Espada. The information seemed impossible. "I am Kami, the god that Sasuke Aizen wished to overthrow. I know of all aspects of all of your lives. Hyunko Mundo is only one of many dimensions that are all connected. I am sending you back to the one you all were originally from." Kami spoke, his voice commanding that the Espada listen. Ulquira was having no issues paying attention, however En Neutra, Sheoloporo, and Grimjow were all protesting the arrangement. "Why the fuck should we agree? Why should we go back to this other world?" Grimjow demanded, getting a glare from Ulquira. "You were not intended to die there. I had plans for the elemental nations, however with you dying, those plans went awry. I need to fix them and you all will help me. I will fuse you all back into one, as you had been. I will not force you to take your previous form, however, and you will be able to choose which form will be taken. Although it seems that Ulquira-kun is of Naruto-kun's original conscious. You do have a form that combines all of you, however that personality would be the closest to Naruto's." Kami sighed, while the Espada all looked at Ulquira. "I have no recollection of ever being known as Naruto, nor do I anticipate allowing myself to be referred to as such." He spoke, letting Kami know that Naruto would never be the same. "While all of you have been existing for 3 millennia in Hyunko Mundo, only 3 years will have passed in the elemental nations. I will return all of your memories once I meld all of you together. You will have a little time to reacquaint yourself to your new body, however be warned. The Akatsuki are at large and have plans for one Gaara no Sabaku. You have a simple goal. Revenge against Akatsuki and Konoha. Both have targeted you in your life and one succeeded. I want you to destroy what has become the new elemental nations. Rebuild with the people who have not betrayed you. This might sting a little." Kami warned before a flash of light, just like the white Zero fired by Kurosaki, flooded the room. Ulquira, who remained the dominant personality after the melding, felt as if a part of him had been missing and was suddenly there once again. A sudden falling sensation passed through him as he realized that he was literally falling through the sky. "This is unfortunate," he murmured to himself, righting his position and attempting to use Kyaku. His Riatsu flared as he successfully stopped his fall, however a moment later it failed and he was plummeting once again. A thud resounded through the area as his impact created a crater. There wasn't any pain, even as he'd fallen for an unknown height, and as he stood and dusted himself off, Ulquira checked his surroundings. To his knowledge, he was in the land known as Wave. A feeling of nostalgia passed over him, and he instinctually knew that he was not far from the town and bridge he'd saved all the years before. His clothing was the same. His white jacket, black sash, and white hakama had not changed. However, he could feel that his mask was no longer on his head. "I would have preferred that not change, but that is of no consequence now." Ulquira frowned, proceeding to the water nearby to glance at himself. In his reflection, he could see that his hollow hole was no longer at the base of his throat and was instead in the center of his chest. Finding no other differences, he moves away from the water and pulls Murcielago from his belt. Nodding as he found no differences in his soul blade, Ulquira remembered something stated by Kami. "You will be able to choose which form you take." Taking a moment to discover the truth of the matter, Ulquira found Murcielago shifting its form. Fucking finally, why the hell is Ulquira so damn boring all the time? Grimjow nearly shouted, stretching his body and glancing around. A moment passed before Ulquiorra was once again the dominant form due to the subtlety needed to move around that his other Espada forms did not possess. It seemed that the form taken by Naruto's body was also the personality that showed through. Walking towards where the town was, Ulquiorra noted that while it was much more prosperous since he'd last visited, the town itself was still impoverished. "State your name, stranger." A young voice came from the top of a gate before the bridge. "Cipher Ulquiorra." "A mere traveler," he replied, his voice in its usual monotone. "Well, Cipher-san, care to explain what your business is with Wave?" The voice, now identified to be belonging to an older Inari, continued to ask. "Visiting an old friend, your grandfather Tazuna." Ulquiorra spoke, feeling the familiarity of the name as it rolled off of his tongue. Something about saying familiar names made a small portion of his chest, around where his covered hollow hole sat, feel warm. "How do you know my Jik-san?" Inari questioned, leading him closer to the gate. Ulquiorra was moments from answering as the name of the bridge flashed before him. "The Great Naruto Bridge," it read in big and bold letters. "We met when I traveled here many years ago." "I see that the bridge was named after the Uzumaki boy. He was a hero." Ulquiorra implored, feeling a small amount of Shale Aparo slip into his personality, particularly the curiosity. He forced it back for the moment, wishing to remain as emotionless as he normally was. The emptiness was best for the job he was to do. Naruto was the one who gave our town the hope that we would live another day, fight another battle, and prosper to where we are. But Konoha took away our savior and demands that we rename the bridge. We refuse, but they have started to attempt to cut off our trade. Inari snarled, spitting the name Konoha out. Ulquiorra felt a spike in his anger, rage from Yami rising to the surface. However, he quelled that emotion as quickly as it arose as well. He would use the rage another day. Now was not the time. "I wish to speak with your family altogether, should it be possible." Ulquiorra spoke, monotonously requesting the audience. "They should all be home. Let's go now." Inari nodded, slightly confused by the sudden request. The walk took 5 minutes, however it was done in silence, as Ulquiorra was not a talkative sort, only speaking if spoken to, and Inari was very uncomfortable with the man he was leading. His black hair was slightly shaggy, with a piece of his fringe falling between emotionless eyes. He looked like someone had taken him out of a drawing. The man's face never changed, and even as Inari watched him out of the corner of his eye, he barely looked like he was breathing. Meanwhile, Ulquiorra was taking stock of his abilities. He could feel that his Hyro had not changed, while his Pesquisa was functioning properly as well. He didn't want to risk a fight by launching a Zero or releasing his Resurrection, so he had to be satisfied by what he found. Stepping into the home after Inari, he found himself face to face with two people he remembered vividly. "Tazuna-san, Tsunami-san, it is a pleasure to see you both in good health." Ulquiorra spoke, bowing his head slightly. "How do you know us?" Tazuna asked, his eyes narrowing. "I will show you." Ulquiorra replied, reaching up and removing his right eye before crushing it within his fist. Tsunami looked as if she would vomit, while Inari and Tazuna flinched at how easily the action was done. "I am Cipher Ulquiorra. I am known by many other names, however, you knew me as this one." He spoke, allowing the crushed eye to show his former client and his family his memories. He showed them his last waking moments, before awakening in Huinko Mundo as a hollow, with his out-of-place color, and finally his time with Aizen. "Naruto-kun, is it really you?" Tsunami asked, putting her hands on Ulquiorra's shoulders. "I am him, however I no longer go by that name." He replied, no emotion, letting Tsunami know that he was the same. "You have been through so much, and it is obvious that you were brought back for a reason." Tazuna shook his head. "My reason is simple. I will raise Konoha to the ground and slaughter all those who have done me wrong in my past life. I will show no mercy." Ulquiorra replied. All three occupants of the room shuddered before Inari got curious. "What you showed us suggested there were 9 of you before. What was your number?" he asked. "I was Quattro, however I have an unleashed form that rivaled that of the strongest Espada," was the reply. It was not spoken in a way that suggested bragging, but as if it were a fact. "These other Espada are part of Naruto." Inari continued to ask. Without saying a word, Ulquiorra shifted into Baragan. "That's right, young one, they are all part of him as well as me. However, as our form changes, so does the personality. All the other ants that make up the boss are nothing compared to me." "I was the king once," Baragan spoke, turning his nose up in the air. Inari turned away with a grimace, knowing that he'd rather deal with no emotions over the arrogance shown by this new body. He is most unpleasant, however, of all of the Espada. His speech patterns do not involve the use of overly vulgar vocabulary. Ulquira returned to control. Why don't you stay here the evening and then you can make your way to where you need to go tomorrow? Rest the night. Tsunade offered. Ulquira would have refused had his body not felt heavy with exhaustion. He was taken by surprise once again by what Kami had done. Not that he felt hunger or thirst or the urge to relieve himself, however he required rest to reset his body. A curious idea for an Arankar to require sleep. As he laid his head down to rest, a pair of black eyes flashed in his memories. The next morning found him awakening at dawn, if not slightly before, with a pair of clothing next to him in the room. Ignoring them, Ulquira made his way into the kitchen, where he thanked Tazuna and his family for their hospitality and left to the woods outside of town. Using Sonido, he found he could travel much quicker through the land and found himself at the start of the desert outside of Suna within a day. Making his way across the sandy terrain, Ulquira was reminded of his life in Huancomundo. It was bleak, monotonously burnt yellow in color and entirely flat as far as the eye could see, and he had unparalleled eyesight. Upon approaching the tall gates of Suna, he slowed from his Sonido and resumed a pace normal for a human being. "State your business," a guard asked, catching the attention of nearby shinobi. "I wish to speak with Gaara no Sabaku." He replied, glancing at the shinobi who approached. To his shock, it was the remains of Team 7, along with a boy whose pallor rivaled Ulquira's own. Sakura had not changed in 3 years, her pink hair still cut short while wearing only a slightly altered version of her former clothing. On her hands were a pair of gloves, and rather than the open-toed boots common for shinobi, she wore a pair of low heels. The other boy in the group was slightly taller than Sakura, with short black hair and black eyes. He had a creepy smile on his face while carrying a large amount of scrolls and paint brushes. "What do you need with our Kazekage?" The guard replied, pulling Ulquira back to the conversation at hand. "I simply wish to speak with him. As an old friend, it has been many years." The guard seemed to hesitate before responding. "Our Kazekage has been kidnapped by Akatsuki. We are sending out parties to retrieve him, however as of now it is not possible to speak with him." The guard spoke with a frustrated sigh. Ulquira felt his Riatsu spike, causing the man in front of him to pale. "Whoever you are, we will retrieve him for you. We have the best ninja team in all the nations." Sakura boasted, turning her nose in the air. "I apologize if I seem doubtful." "However, how is it that this happened?" Ulquira replied, turning his question to the guard. "Deidara of Akatsuki was the one who came. Our ninja were scattered by his explosions, giving him cover." The guard swallowed. Ulquira nodded, beginning to walk past the guard into the city, before being stopped by Kakashi. He placed a hand on Ulquira's shoulder. "Are you a ninja?" the silver-haired man asked. "No, however I will not hesitate to remove your limb if you do not remove it from my shoulder yourself." He spoke, tone even however words suggesting he was not to be trifled with. "My apologies, I simply wished to ask you for your name." "Why should I give my name if you have not given yours first? I will withhold that information. There are more pressing matters than my identity." Ulquira continued walking. However, as soon as he was outside arm's reach of the Konoha ninja, he used his Sonido to arrive at the office of the Kazekage at a much more rapid pace. "How did you get in here?" Temari asked, preparing to attack. "That is not important. I am prepared to retrieve Gaara. I wish to speak with him as he is an old friend." Ulquira spoke, the word friend sounding foreign on his tongue to himself and the occupants of the room. "How did you know him, a friend?" Kinkuro asked, confused mostly as he'd never seen the pale man in his life. "It was a long time ago. I wish to catch up. However, that is difficult as he is no longer here. I will leave at once." With that, he used the window and combined 3 of his techniques to be able to find Gaara at a much quicker rate. Using Hiron Kyaku to not fall from the window, combined with Sonido and Pesquisa, he was able to locate the direction of which he would need to travel to retrieve his lost friend. Across the desert the very same way that he'd arrived, Ulquira discovered that he'd probably passed the kidnapper at some point before arriving in Suna. The location of the enemy base was anything less than subtle, taking measures that the Akatsuki would not be able to sense him. As he arrived at the strongest presence of the Jinchuriki, he discovered that the chamber was sealed by a large boulder, protected by a seal on its face. "This is child's play." Ulquira muttered, raising his hand and blasting the door down with a green siro. Within moments the members of Akatsuki were made aware of the intrusion on their hideaway. "Sasori, Deidara, make sure that the intruder is taken care of." If they were able to get through that door, one of you may not be enough. Pain ordered, focusing back on removing Ikabai from the young Kazekage. Both members said nothing, however they left immediately, seeking out the intruder or intruders if there was more than one. An argument ensued, a debate over art as a form. However, it was easy for Ulquira to take advantage of the distracted enemies, as one Sunido placed him behind them. I do not know of why you have abducted Gaara, however it is my duty to retrieve him. Ulquira addressed the two shinobi, who attacked as soon as they sensed him, however neither were successful. My Hyro is far too strong for attacks from you trash, this will be easy. He spoke, not drawing Murcielago, but using a bala to launch the first of his opponents away. Who the hell are you? The blonde-haired Mane shouted, drawing Ulquira's attention. He was the one who took the bala attack, which damaged his right shoulder. I am Cypher Ulquira, I have come to retrieve the Kazekage. Ulquira stated, firing a second bala at the other opponent, who was still hunched over like a spider. Both opponents wore black cloaks with red clouds on them and had rings on their fingers. Which of you is Deidara? He asked, glancing between the two. The blonde-haired man smirked and nodded his head. So you've heard of me, huh? I guess my explosive art is well known. The man now identified as Deidara chuckled, however he soon felt the temperature of the room drop. Surrounding Ulquira was a black and green aura, his Riatsu, that made the room feel as if it were frozen over entirely. You shall be the first to die, trash. He almost growled, stealing his emotions, only bearing a frown on his face. Deidara felt his heart drop into his stomach, knowing that whatever it was that the man in front of him was about to do, it would hurt way more than the first attack did. Preparing balls of clay within his hands, Deidara was ready for an attack. Ulquira used a Sunido to get behind Deidara, throwing a hand at the other man's torso in order to penetrate his body, while Deidara managed to dodge and throw a bunch of clay birds into the air. All of them targeted Ulquira, who dodged them all using his Sunido. I have played for too long. It is time to end this. Ulquira spoke, moving forward to finish off his opponent, however he was stopped by an attack by the other Akatsuki member. I am Sasori, the puppet master. I will be your opponent as well. The man spoke, now identified as a puppet. Trivial, your power is no match for mine. Ulquira said coldly, removing his hand from his pocket and pointing a finger at Sasori. Before the crouched puppet could react, a green energy beam shot from Ulquira's finger and decimated the puppet that Sasori was using. Zero was all that was said on the matter before another clay animal, shaped like a lion, darted forward, attempting to take Ulquira out. This one detonated before Ulquira could dispatch it, and he was left with charred sleeves and charred skin on the front side of his body. The blast sent him back several feet, however he stopped his movement and glanced back at his opponents. Damn, your skin is fucking thick. I thought that would at least keep you injured. Deidara swore, obviously at a loss that his attacks had yet to do significant damage. You trash cannot hurt me. I have fought more worthy opponents than you both combined. This is pathetic, he spat, growing increasingly bored by the lack of real opposition. You took out one of my best puppets, however. I am not through with you yet. Sasori spoke, revealing a young boy, no older than 10, wearing the same cloak as before. In his hands he held a scroll, with which he proceeded to unseal another 2 puppets. They were a man and a woman, obviously of the same age, however they seemed to bear some importance to the boy. Have you made puppets out of your parents, boy? Ulquira asked, not concerned with why. Yes, and now they are your opponents. Sasori shouted, launching the 2 puppets at the Espada, who took no time in dodging the attacks and severing the link between their master and themselves. This is still a waste of my time, he coldly stated before gauging his opponents. Sasori was running lower on chakra, as he'd used a lot of it to control not only his body but the puppets as well, while Deidara was consuming a large amount of clay before spitting it back up again. What formed as a dragon, almost as large as the tunnel they were in. It spat explosive fireballs at him, and while they were easy to dodge, he now had 3 opponents, one of which he needed to dispatch before focusing on the other 2. The dragon roared, rearing its head back to fire another attack at Ulquira, who merely dodged them before finally drawing Murcielago. He would not release his Resurrection, however he could take care of his opponents without unsealing his abilities. Trash. He spoke, firing a Ciro Oscuras at the dragon, before using his Sunido, faster than he had before, to appear before Sasori. With one swift motion, he thrust his arm straight through the chest of the puppet, which had Sasori's life tied to it. You have proved to be a most annoying piece of trash. Ulquira spoke, blocking an attack on his back with his sword, before dropping Sasori's lifeless puppet body to the ground. You have not escaped my notice. Ulquira turned back to Deidara, who had removed his cloak and was consuming large amounts of clay. Art is a bang, he shouted before his whole body became his bomb. Ulquira was trapped, as there was no better place to go to dodge the attack, and he was left with only his Hyro to protect him. A moment passed after the explosion, and Ulquira dropped some of the pressure from his Ryatsu in order to survey his surroundings. The tunnel that had been opened before him was larger than before, the opening to the cave much larger than it had been, and if the Akatsuki did not know of his existence before, they surely did now. Moving further within the cave, he came to an opening where a large statue sat that looked as if it were sucking the life out of Gaara. Slicing his finger on Murcielago, he pointed it at the statue. Gran Race Zero. Ulquira did not hesitate as he fired off one of the strongest Zero attacks he could. The statue was not able to withstand the attack, and Ulquira caught Gaara as he fell. You have interrupted a very important ritual. Who are you to do such a thing? A voice asked as an astral projection spoke. There were 8 projections around the statue that crumbled to the ground. I am Cypher Ulquira. I came to retrieve the Kazekage, and as I have him, I will take my leave. Ulquira spoke, turning towards the door and leaving the same way he'd come. Outside the cave, which was beginning to crumble from a lack of structural support, stood his former team. Gaara is alive. I have defeated Akatsuki members Sasori and Deidara, however the other members were not present physically. He mentioned to the group. His eyes fell onto one member who stood at the back. The black eyes and black hair was familiar, along with the fair skin. He was taller than he had been as a child, however Sasuke Uchiha had not changed as much as Ulquira, who knew him as Naruto Uzumaki, had assumed he would. We're lucky you got here before us. If Sasuke had been there, it would have gone so much quicker. Sakura boasted before getting a glare from Sasuke. I wouldn't have been able to do much at all. How were you able to take out 2 of their members and save Gaara? Who are you? What are you? Sasuke asked, not demanding the answers, however seeming much more curious. I am Cypher Ulquira, an ambassador from Hyunko Mundo, a land far beyond the elemental nations and the seas surrounding them. I am an Espada. He responded, not lying about where he was from, but not entirely telling the truth either. You must be strong if you were able to take out 2 S-class Nuke Nin. The other pale boy on Sasuke's team spoke. It matters not my strength. Ulquira removed Gaara from Sakura's grasp, who seemed to have been healing him. I will take care of him. We must return to Suna promptly. He opened a garganta and stepped through, bringing Gaara with him. It closed a moment later, and he stepped out within eyesight of Suna's gate. Who are you? Gaara asked, and Ulquira, for once in his life, felt extremely frustrated by the constant need for introductions. Taking a moment, knowing that having Gaara as an ally would benefit them both, he removed his right eye, crushing it in his hand while a bewildered and shocked Gaara watched. Memories flooded the area around them, and before it was over, Gaara had taken Ulquira's hand within his own and was shaking it. Naruto, you've returned. Gaara seemed to almost smile. This man was very much like how he currently was, mostly emotionless, cold, and callous. However, this shock was more than enough to bring emotions out. I do not refer to myself by that name. I have not held that name for over 3 millennia. Ulquira corrected, resisting the urge to call him trash. Of course, my mistake. Come, we have much to discuss, and Temari and Kankuro should be alerted of my and your return. Gaara stood, stumbling slightly before catching himself, leading the way back into Suna. Ulquira could only follow, however the Grimjow in him wanted to chat more. Silencing him, Ulquira followed Gaara, keen on discovering what all changed while he was dead, not that he could be classified as alive as he was. Ulquira could only speculate that he was somewhere in between. His hollow hole was still present, leading him to believe he was closer to dead. Once in the office, it soon became apparent that discussions would need to wait, as the siblings were fluttering around Gaara, checking him over for injuries and chakra levels, as well as checking his seals to ascertain if his biju was still sealed within. It would seem that you arrived at the perfect time, Ulquira-san. He still has the Ikibai. Not that he told me that, Temari commented callously. She seemed to not like him for whatever reason, as she'd never met him. He is alive, awake, speaking, and aware of not only who I am, but what I have come to do. It is no surprise that he has not been as vocal. However, it seems as if his tenant has decided to leave his mind alone. He was unconscious on the trip back to your village, without any attempted struggles for control. Ulquiorra spoke, suppressing Shale-Aporo's curiosity to study the Jinchuriki. It was pleasant that many of his other aspects, Tyr, Coyote, Zamari, Aroniro, and N-Neutra, had yet to make their presence known. However, it was only a matter of time before the personalities fully integrated. For now, Ulquiorra was the best for the mission, less tendency for distraction. Lacking Naruto's natural flamboyancy and boisterousness was another positive. It helped to keep his identity to as few people as possible. What has occurred in Konoha since my absence? Ulquiorra spoke to Gaara, ignoring Temari and Kenkuro's confusion. If you were in the elemental nations, surely we would have seen you, or heard of you. You stick out like a blunt kunai. Temari commented, returning Gaara's clothing to him. Konoha has become an extremely powerful nation since your death. It was taken over by Danzo not long after Tsunade was considered unfit to lead. Many others were placed under very controlled watch. Only teams approved of by Danzo leave the nation. Gaara explained, also ignoring his siblings. Kenkuro dropped the spool of ninja wire he'd been wrapping, astonished by words that seemed to not faze the two holding the current conversation. Death, what does that mean? How, if you don't mind me asking, because obviously you both are on a completely different page, if not scroll, than the two of us lowly siblings here. How the hell are you talking if you're dead? Kenkuro all but yelled. Ulquiorra resisted the urge to call him trash. It was rude to belittle his allies' siblings, regardless of his lack of intelligence. He slowly unzipped the white jacket, revealing the hole in his chest. I am neither alive nor dead. Many years previous I was killed in Konoha for a crime I did not commit. I have returned by the grace, if one could call it that, of Kami. Ulquiorra spoke, nearly biting out part of his sentence as he repressed Grimjow once again. Why, you still make it seem like this is normal, Temari muttered, putting her hands out. You live in a dimension where it is possible to walk on water, expel fire from one's mouth, and change the shape of your body. Returning from the dead should not seem that foreign. Ulquiorra responded in a neutral tone. Gaara nodded as well, having seen the memories of his former friend and ally. You said that you were executed by Konoha, but the last execution they've had in over 10 years was Naruto. Temari's eyes widened as she realized who she was speaking to. I do not use that name. That boy you knew died those 3 years ago. Ulquiorra spoke. He never raised his voice, and it was astonishing for Temari and Kenkuro to see that this man in front of them was nothing like the annoying blonde they'd once known. What happened that turned you into this? Kenkuro asked, gesturing to all of Ulquiorra. He remembered something that Kami had mentioned, that his form could change to allow Naruto's original personality to somewhat show through. Taking a moment to collect all of his forms into one, the combined personality allowed himself to be called Naruto due to his past. His hair stayed the same length, however turned a shade of dusky pink. His eyes he felt shift from emerald green to teal, signifying Tyr's eyes, while a grin grew on his face. His skin was still pale, while the tear marks under his eyes stayed. Scars began to show themselves over his chin and forehead, and a small patch of hair grew over his chin. The number he'd had on his chest changed from 4 to 0. Woo, it was stuffy all the way in the back there. Naruto shrugged his now fully changed shoulders. All three of the Sand siblings blinked rapidly at the same time. That's a neat trick you three have. How much practice did it take? Naruto asked, his grin never leaving his face. N-Neutra's personality combined with his was having a field day. Naruto, is that really you? Kenkuro asked, confused by the change. Rather than keeping Ulquiorra's clothing, it changed to a shorter jacket that was open, revealing the hole in his chest, along with the black sash and white hakama. Yeah, this is the closest we'll get to what Naruto was actually like. None of my aspects have happiness involved, or any of the positive aspects of being human. I lost them when those bastards in Konoha fucked me over. I spent 3 fucking millennia as separate personalities, all of which were negative. Naruto answered, anger clear on his face. It was much more expressive than Ulquiorra's had been, which was kept mostly blank. I can't even imagine what that would have been like for you. Why have you come back to the elemental nations? Gaara spoke, knowing there was another he'd be back. Revenge. Kami spoke of how the timelines were shifted due to my death. I guess he wants me to take care of setting them right again, or as he said, start over. Naruto shrugged, maneuvering the Zanpakuto on his belt carefully. It was different from Murcielago, which made sense. The sword he now had was his own, not one of the Espadas. Redencion was her name, very fitting for the dead ninja. I see. What do you plan on doing for revenge? Temari nodded. I plan to destroy Konoha, saving only those who did not wish me harm before resetting the elemental nations once again. So I might end up decimating some of the villages, but only so that they could be rebuilt properly." Naruto shrugged. "Are you able to do that on your own?" Kinkuro asked incredulously. Naruto nodded. "When I'm in this form, I have control over every aspect of my abilities." As Ulquiorra, I was able to kill both Sasori and Deidara with ease. Ulquiorra is the fourth Espada. Combined, we make up something more powerful than even a Biju. Naruto chuckled, seeing the three faces in front of him pale. "Ikibai is confirming your power. Do you not have chakra anymore?" Gaara asked, tilting his head slightly. "No, I have Reiatsu, or spirit pressure. It is similar in that it can be used for physical attacks. I have multiple attacks that use pressure." Naruto responded, picking something out from underneath his black nails. "I am going to shift back to Ulquiorra if that's all. I would rather not reveal too much more of my abilities to the Konoha ninja." Naruto glanced between the siblings while they nodded. "Just so you know, Sasuke's hit 8 was left at the valley where you fought. When you were executed, he took yours. He's wearing yours." Temari sighed. She'd been going back and forth in communications with Shikamaru, and she would say it was mostly due to her ambassador job. He told her about the wrongdoings of the village and how overworked people were. Tsunade fled once again along with Jiraiya. It was easy to see why everyone left. Naruto found himself feeling sad, incomplete again. He'd known that he was attracted to Sasuke when he was alive. The black-haired boy was always pushing him to be a better ninja, but also showing him a side that was hard to notice at first. He showed him that it didn't take an extraordinarily smart man to be a great ninja. Naruto felt his heart swell, a feeling he never thought he'd experience again. "He shall be spared. His life was difficult, and while he was an ass to me, he was my best friend." Naruto swore. He couldn't say the same for his other teammates, Sakura and Kakashi. Kakashi was his executioner, and Naruto knew he'd be one of the first or last to die. Sakura never gave a shit about him and treated him like a lowly pest rather than an equal. She'd also perish. Not feeling comfortable with the change in emotions, Naruto shifted back into Ulquiorra. The lack of feeling calmed his nerves down, and almost as soon as the shift was over, the Konoha were barging through the door. "I told them to knock," Sasuke muttered, glancing at Ulquiorra one more time before turning away. Ulquiorra could see his former hit I-8 on the black-haired boy's forehead and turned his body to face his former friend. It wasn't scratched badly since he'd lost it. There wasn't a line through it as he'd expected there to be. It was polished and well taken care of. The cloth a black color, rather than the navy blue, was the only real change he could see. Impulsively, he placed a hand on it, tracing the rivets that held it in place before pulling his hand away. "Gaara, you are in good health. You have my report and the backing of my country." Ulquiorra spoke, turning to the redhead one last time before leaving the room. He couldn't stand to be around the pink-haired banshee or his silver-haired former instructor. "I understand, thank you, Cypher-san." Gaara nodded. "What deal? What backing could Suna possibly need with Konoha as an ally?" Sakura demanded. "It is a trade deal. His country has necessary items for trade that Konoha cannot provide." Temari glared the pinkette down. "It is none of our business who they trade with. They are an ally of ours, not a slave country." Sasuke spoke, taking Sakura down with a glare. "Whatever you say, Sasuke-kun." She smiled at him, relenting only because he'd said it. "Naruto, how I wish you were still here." Sasuke sighed. It wasn't long before the meeting with Gaara finished and the Konoha ninja were leaving the office. Sakura was pissed that the stranger from another land had taken their job away from them. However, after being placated by Sasuke that it seemed to have been a better result, she backed down. Ulquiorra was still subjected to her pathetic attempt at using killer intent as she passed him. Sasuke told his team that he'd catch up to them and paused before the strange man. Ulquiorra expected something snide to leave his mouth, only for Sasuke to bow his head to him. "I apologize for my teammates' treatment. Times have changed and it seems that we've only grown more arrogant. It wasn't the village that it used to be. Once again I am deeply sorry, Cypher-san." Sasuke bowed. "Ulquiorra, I am not much older than you." Ulquiorra lied. It was strange. He couldn't piece together why he'd wanted Sasuke to use his first name, nor could he understand why he'd told him he was his age. Ulquiorra was over 3,000 years older than the black-haired ninja. Ulquiorra then. Sasuke smiled softly. Another swell in Ulquiorra's chest told him that the meld of his personalities was affecting every aspect of him more than he'd thought it would. Apparently his death as the human known as Naruto was something that caused a change in Sasuke. He seemed nicer, less hell-bent on revenge against his brother for decimating his clan. You have changed, Uchiha-san, from what I was told of you. Have you given up revenge on your brother? Ulquiorra asked, his voice never changing from its cold monotone. I still want to kill him. He killed our mother, who did not deserve to die. But I want to take down Konoha more. They ordered him to kill our clan. Told him that they were planning a coup and needed someone loyal to infiltrate and eliminate the problem. I won't be able to forgive Itachi for agreeing to do it, but I will not be able to get over Konoha's constant betrayal of my trust. First my clan, and subsequently my brother, then the only person I ever came to respect was slaughtered in front of me. I loved him more than I've loved another. He was a light at the end of a dark tunnel for me. Sasuke chuckled to himself. It was unlike him to speak as much as he was, but something about the cold and expressionless man in front of him dragged out the words he'd never said. When Sasuke was informed of the betrayal of the village, he was angry. However, he was also angry at his clan. He'd been led to believe that everyone was on the same side, but his beliefs were fighting a losing battle. His own clan betrayed the village, and because of that, the village betrayed him by having them all killed. Uchiha-san, you wouldn't happen to be referring to the Uzumaki boy? Ulquiorra stated, realizing that Sasuke had just described his former self as the light of his life. Sasuke, it's just Sasuke. That name is worthless now, but yes, Naruto was that boy. It took his death for me to realize that the feelings that I'd thought were rivalry were actually admiration. One would think it would be hard to confuse them, but I mistook my own emotions for years. Ulquiorra nodded, knowing about what it felt to not understand emotions. I am glad we had this talk, Sasuke-san. I believe your team is waiting, trash that they are. Ulquiorra spoke, muttering the last part under his breath. However, it seemed that Sasuke heard him. He chose not to bring that up, however. My team is expected back in Konoha. Should you choose to visit, find me. Sasuke put his hand out. Ulquiorra was surprised, however he didn't let that show on his face. He shook Sasuke's hand before opening a garganta to the outside of the village. Once away, his body forcefully shifted into tear. It wasn't a change that was expected, however it was welcome as a calm sensation washed over her. That was something I was unprepared for. She spoke out loud, crossing her arms under her generous S. A small sigh escaped her lips. Having a feminine side to Naruto was never something that was negative. And for tear to be an obvious calming method for his whole being showed that tear was highly appreciated. Who are you? Sakura's voice called in an annoyed fashion. She was getting really tired of seeing these freaks in white hakamas all over the place. Tear turned around to answer, but was met with an even angrier face from Sakura and a lusty look from Kakashi. Tear was anything but embarrassed, however. She'd spent many years as she was, and no amounts of perverted glances by men or jealous looks by women would cause her any shame. I am waiting for Ulquiorra Teichu. Tear spoke, choosing not to reveal that she was one and the same as him. It was beyond the human comprehension at that point. Oh, so you're with that freak, Sakura chose to state. Tear was not easy to anger, having only lashed out at one in her life, and that was Aizen. However, Grimjo, Baragan, Lilinet, Sheoliporo, and Noitra were all very easy to piss off. These personalities were hard to fight down as Tear used all of her willpower to not draw Tiburon in retaliation. You will refrain from calling him or any of us freaks. It will lead to your death. She chose to bite out. Sasuke was looking at her in a strange manner, however she realized that in this form she resembled what could only be a female Naruto. Her tan skin with the blonde hair that was short and spiky. Her aqua eyes were even the same color. Tear mused for a moment that while Ulquiorra was their main personality, she was closest to Naruto's main form, even if the gender was not the same. Have I done something to warrant your staring, Uchiha-san? Tear asked, glancing at him. He shook his head quickly, blushing at having been caught. You and your leader can come to Konoha if you wish. I'm sure they'd be glad to have you. Kakashi spoke in what could only be a lecherous manner. Tear narrowed her eyes. Going to Konoha had crossed her mind, not to stay, not to fight for them, and most definitely not to make amends. No, she was going to go to Konoha for something completely different. I will consider your request and put it towards my fellow Espada. She spoke before turning away again. She felt a small amount of heat towards her back and moved away from the hand that was going to touch her. It is strange that you and that other, Espada was it, wear such unprotective clothing. It is as if you do not plan on receiving any attacks. This is a land of ninja. It is uncommon for many, even civilians, to go unscathed. The pale boy whose name was never given to her spoke. It's because your simple attacks cannot wound us for longer than a few moments at best. Our Hyro is stronger than your skin. Tyr explained. She wasn't bragging, it wasn't in her nature. Is that why Ulquiorra-san returned with only damage to his clothing? Sasuke asked. He'd noticed the damage to the clothing, however the hollow hole in her chest was still covered. Due to the melding of the personalities and bodies, the hollow hole had relocated to the center of the chest, not changing locations with the change of personality. That is correct, Tyr agreed. While this conversation is riveting and I'd love to keep chatting with you, I really would, we must get back to Konoha. Danzo-san is expecting a report. Kakashi nodded, eyeing her chest one more time before leading the Konohanin back to the village. Tyr shifted to Coyote, who rubbed the goatee he had on his chin and sighed. This is such a troublesome mission. I guess I should find one of the Sannin, preferably Tsunade. At least she seems to have gotten the right idea. He sighed. This was probably the personality that influenced the need to sleep on a regular basis. Coyote would be the first to admit that his energy level was far less than that of the rest of them. A sigh escaped his lips one last time before Ulquiorra was in control again, and less emotional. Reaching out with his pesquisa as far as it would reach, he felt the spike of her soul in a town a good distance away. Tsunade would close the distance within a few hours as she was in Tea Country. Taking a moment to make sure there were no other obstacles, he took off in the direction that he sensed the busty former Hawkage. It hadn't taken him long to find her, not only because of her chakra signature, but because of the failed gambling attempts she'd left in her wake. Tsunade was one of the few people in the world who had the worst luck, but that worked as an advantage for Ulquiorra. He decided to follow her for a few days, keeping track of who she made contact with and where she went, but after a while she noticed his presence, especially because he stood out in a crowd. "The fuck do you want? You've been following me long enough," she growled at him as he kept his face neutral. "I am curious to see how far the once great Tsunade Senju of the Sannin has fallen." Ulquiorra replied. He wasn't planning on fighting her, however one of her fists appeared in his face. Ducking out of the way of the chakra-infused punch, he stepped back and away, keeping out of reach of her attacks. "Stand still, you creepy stalker bastard," she growled, continuing her attacks. "Tsunade-san, I do not wish to fight you. I wish to speak with you about Konoha. I have information about one Uzumaki Naruto." Ulquiorra spoke, still dodging as the powerful woman unleashed another chakra-fueled attack. "What did you say?" She stopped a moment later, seemingly calmer however still on edge. "I have critical information on one Uzumaki Naruto that I wish to discuss with you. I also wish to discuss your former village." Ulquiorra stayed a fair distance out of her immediate reach at that moment, not risking getting hit by her. It might not do much damage, but it was still unpleasant. "What could you possibly tell me about that hellhole of a village that I didn't already know? And that boy died 3 years ago, along with what was left of my heart intolerance for that place called Konoha." She snapped, grabbing the bottle of sake she'd placed on the ground. "Even if I told you that I plan on burning the village to the ground with as many of the members who wronged the boy as possible," he asked, causing the woman to pause again. "What reason do you have to want to destroy them? You aren't even a ninja, damn slippery civilian maybe, but no chakra around you." She looked him up and down. "This is why I wanted to discuss this with you in private and not a public street. This may be a neutral country, but Konoha spies could potentially be anywhere." Ulquiorra began to walk away, knowing that Tsunade would follow due to her curiosity. Getting a hotel room was no problem, and once they were seated within the closed space, Ulquiorra shifted to his zero form. "How's it going, Oba-chan?" Naruto asked, the grin on his face wide, as he admitted that he was somewhat glad to see his godmother. A moment passed before the look on her face changed from confused to shocked, then to angry, and finally tears began to stream down her face. "My boy, my Sochi, I'm so sorry, Naruto." She started crying, clinging to his jacket. "I didn't know you thought of me like your son. Well, that proves to me you get to live." He chuckled in an amused manner. "Wait, what?" She pulled away, startled by how easily he'd discussed killing. "I'll say this, my form can change, and this is the only one that I'll accept being called Naruto in because it's the closest you'll get to my former self. When I died here, my soul was split into 9 other beings, ironically. Because of my hatred and anger at Konoha, all of the beings reflected my feelings as I'd passed. In the world I was reborn into, I spent 3 millennia roaming a desolate wasteland, and finally serving under a man I thought would make a difference. However, all of the pieces that were formerly me were killed while serving this man who couldn't care less about us. When we'd all died, we were gathered by Kami and rejoined together to come back to the elemental nations. We were given a mission to take down Konoha and any other threat to peace. This is most definitely about revenge, for my death and revenge for those who have suffered because of it. I am more powerful than I ever was. My blade, Redencion, cannot be broken by anything mere mortals have. Naruto, or whoever you are now, I will respect your wish to be referred to as you like. I can only say that I have hated that village since before I was even brought to serve as its Hokage. I hated that council and the corruption that was allowed to seep into its people with Hiruzen. Tsunade would have continued, but a cold shiver went down her back at the mention of her former teacher's name. He is the cause of my suffering, a ninja turned politician with no backbone. He chose to watch me suffer at the hands of the civilians because it appeased them, rather than allow me my basic human rights. Abuse and neglect followed me for years. I was stunted, I was weak. He can rot in hell because that is surely where he went. That man did not deserve a spot in the Soul Society. Naruto spat, his anger perforating the room. Tsunade realized then that the tolerant and happy boy she once knew was gone. The man standing before her was a trained killer and a man who felt nothing towards those whose lives he took. You have suffered enough. It's time to take back the world. How do you plan on going about this? Tsunade asked, leaning forward with a determined look on her face. First, I have to help you out with some of your abilities. I cannot rationally allow humans who can be hurt and killed to fight for me without protection, however it comes at a cost. Naruto spoke, his tone becoming serious. Tsunade hesitated for a moment before she said her piece. Whatever the cost, I will fight by my Sochi. She sat up straight, proving that she was resilient. That is good, because the cost is your death, Naruto said almost sheepishly as he grabbed her forehead in his hands. Channeling his Riatsu into his palm, he began to pump it into Tsunade's body. It was something he'd realized he could do when he last took his Zero Forma. He could change anyone he wished into an Arankar, and from that form an Espada. What a better way to find out how it was possible with an ally. As she absorbed his Riatsu, he began to see changes in her. Her skin color stayed the same, however her clothing changed, as well as the spot on her forehead. A mask formed over her face, which covered her eyes in lace-like patterns. However, a large black diamond covered the center of her face, and her mask had no mouth. Her hair remained the same, as did the rest of her body, but a hollow hole formed over her stomach. A sword emerged from her hollow hole that Naruto proceeded to remove and set aside for the moment. Once the transformation into an Arankar has finished, I will make you my Primera Espada, my number one. Naruto let go of her face as she stepped back and looked around. Remove the mask, Tsunade. He instructed as she reached up to pull the mask away. As she did, a burst of her Riatsu flooded the room, however she quickly pulled in control. A piece of her mask, which resembled a masquerade-style mask with lace-like designs around her eyes, clung to the right side of her brow. It was how all Espada had been. A piece of their masks remained even after removal. I will teach you how to master your techniques, however with how your chakra control had been, the Riatsu control will be easy. Naruto nodded as she took a deep breath. What did you do? She asked, her voice sounding younger. In fact, all over her looked as though she was 20 again. I flooded your system with my Riatsu. It overtook the chakra and I created an Espada out of you. Now, I must place your number on you. Where would it be? Naruto asked, unlike in his forms because he was creating his own Espada, they needed to be branded with their numbers. My neck, right here. She pointed to the right side of her neck, right below her ear. Naruto nodded and placed his hand there, creating the number. This is your sword. It is bound to your soul and will never break. You will know the name of it because it is part of you. Tsunade grabbed the sword from where he'd placed it. It was a traditional Japanese katana in shape. The scabbard was black while the hilt was wrapped in green silks. It was long for a katana. Meru, she spoke in almost a hushed whisper. Naruto nodded. It was a good name for her blade. Naruto sighed. He was getting tired of keeping up the mentality of being chipper, mostly because it wasn't possible for him to be happy anymore. As much as I am somewhat relieved to have you with me once more, I must sleep. It is an odd physical quirk that Kami left me with. I do not need to eat, drink, defecate, or urinate. However, I require sleep. I will be shifting back to the form you met me in as well. It is a calmer form, less attention-grabbing. Naruto groaned as his body shifted back to Ulquiorra. His emotions faded away and he was left once again in the welcome cold. It would seem that I no longer require sleep. What do you want me to do? Tsunade asked, knowing that because Ulquira's number was technically 0, even though the one on his chest was different now, he was in charge. Find Jiraiya, bring him here, we'll see if he still has spies in Konoha that can give us vital information. Do not reveal your identity to him upon greeting him. We will have our talk before that. He owes me and my family much. You know of who your parents were? Tsunade asked. Ulquira could hear the guilt in her voice. I do not bear a grudge against those who kept it from me, those being you and Jiraiya. The rest were trash. He replied, before removing a layer of clothing and getting into the bed. It hadn't taken longer than a day before Tsunade had located her ever-perverted former teammate. He was always leaving a trail of angered women behind him from his research. If it had been up to her, she would have burned the whole series to a crisp. It was lucky for her that her face had changed enough that Jiraiya no longer recognized it, as did her body shape. Tsunade no longer had the body of a woman in her 30s, but a lithe and shapely body of a 20-year-old girl. Her bust stayed the same, and the clothing she wore accented it. Rather than feeling exposed by this, Tsunade knew that she was protected against anything that the ninja world could attack her with. Her white jacket cut off just below her S, which were showing ample cleavage despite the fabric covering them. Her hollow hole was visible, however not many would question what it was. And what is a young thing like you doing around here dressed like that? It is winter, you know. Jiraiya eyed her in a predatory manner that made her want to shudder in disgust. She kept her body still as he got closer. I came to find you. My associate has been searching for you. It would be ideal if you came with me. She spoke, keeping her voice even, hoping that he wouldn't recognize her. The diamond on her forehead was slightly different shaped than it had been before, and she all around looked different enough. Oh, and who is this associate of yours, cute like you? Jiraiya seemed to not take her seriously, but she could change that. The only known execution in Konoha in the past 10 years, does that ring a bell? Tsunade spoke, her voice starting to betray her emotions. That stopped the white-haired Sannin in his tracks. That is impossible. He was, no one can, I would know. Jiraiya shouted, starting to get angry. I assumed the same before a day ago, however we knew less about this world than we thought, Jiraiya. She spoke, knowing that in some way he would figure her out eventually. Show me, he demanded, preparing to run after her. Tsunade had a different plan. In the time she'd spent searching for her ever-wayward teammate, she'd been trying to figure out all of the abilities she had. Her senses were unparalleled, helping her to see as far as a few miles away with perfected ease. Tsunade was also amazed when a hole ripped in the air next to her, and when she stepped through it, she was returned to Ulquira's side. She charged this gate, however. A ninja that bore a Konoha forehead protector stepped out of the shadows and threw an earth elemental jutsu at them. Tsunade pushed Jiraiya through the gate she'd made and faced the ninja. This will take you to my associate. Be warned, he does not tolerate stupidity as I have. She spoke, closing it behind him. We have been keeping tabs on that ninja in order to recruit him back to Konoha. We are the greatest ninja village in the world. Who are you to get in our way? The man shouted, I am Kaori. It does not matter to me what Konoha wishes. I follow only my creator. Tsunade spoke, giving herself an alias. It did not bode well that the ninja of Konoha were following the Sannin. And knowing Danzo, it meant that someone had been keeping tabs on her as well. And who is your creator to stand against the world's greatest village? The man shouted once more, leading Tsunade to believe he'd been brainwashed in some way, especially if he were shouting about a well-known and despised place. A man not to be trifled with. Talking is useless. My business here is done. Tsunade turned to leave, however dodged away from a kunai as it went by her face. You can't leave until you tell me more about the threat you and your creator pose to Konoha. Tsunade would have laughed at how ridiculous the man sounded if not for the fact that he was attempting to kill her. Tsunade decided to not respond and instead got in close to him, using some of her natural speed, and threw a punch that sent him spiraling into a wall behind him. Shit, I need to learn to control that. She muttered to herself, focusing on calming her Riatsu down. It wouldn't do her any good to release it as she had been. I have spent far too long dealing with you. Tsunade finally sighed and opened up a gate before stepping through. She made sure it closed without the pursuing ninja behind her and stepped out to find Jiraiya angrily sitting tied to a chair. Were you aware that Konoha ninja were tailing you? She asked as soon as he'd looked at her. I was aware, yes. That was the third team to approach me, trying to get my spy network back. I'll have you know that I've heard rumors of you before you even sent for me. The broad is new though. Jiraiya commented. You will not refer to her in that manner again. I had her bring you back for a civil conversation, one that will not occur should you insult her once more. Ulquira spoke, his voice cold and emotionless as ever. Do you want to start at the beginning or should I start? Tsunade asked, looking at her partner. You may begin. Ulquira conceded before standing off to the side. I had thought you would have somewhat recognized me. It has not been that long. However, that isn't what matters. We brought you back here because it is the fate of this world to be burned to the ground, starting with our world's biggest threat, Konoha. Tsunade spoke, her voice level, even as she spoke about killing almost millions of people. Jiraiya looked at her as if she were crazy, however they weren't going to allow him to speak just yet. Our goal is to sort the people into two categories, those who deserve saving and those who will die. We have a few names already and are allied with the Kazekage and his siblings. Ulquira put in. Tsunade nodded. How are you basing those who are worthy? Is that not what the Akatsuki are planning for this world? How do I know you are different from that group? The older man asked, skeptical. You are right to question us, however would you not believe the word of someone you know? Ulquira asked, gesturing to Tsunade. Jiraiya looked her over once more. I can tell you who she looks like, but that teammate of mine hasn't looked like that since she was young. He nearly laughed in their faces. You idiot, do you know anyone else who looks like me? Tsunade snapped angrily. For someone whose job it is to be able to make even the most obscure observations, he seemed incapable of seeing the obvious implications before him. Tsunade, he muttered, realizing it really was her. He hadn't wanted to believe it because although she looked very similar, there were too many differences, such as the giant hole in her stomach and the fact that she wasn't older. I was recruited by Ulquira to help his cause. He was able to persuade me, as I'm sure he will to you as well. Tsunade confirmed. Jiraiya was awestruck. The woman before him was his former teammate. She seemed to have abilities that she didn't have before as well. Ulquira, as he shifted to Naruto just outside of Jiraiya's view, was contemplating how he would handle his former mentor. While he wanted to be able to trust him, he also wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to end up being a problem in the future. It isn't that hard, Oro-sanin. It wasn't as if 3 hard millennia as 9 separate beings was going to keep me down. Naruto spoke, his voice still not able to portray any emotions other than nostalgic regret. No one has called me that since Naruto died. Jiraiya spoke mostly to himself. The man standing in front of him didn't look anything like the blonde-haired Gaki he once knew, but the tone of voice and way he spoke said everything. How? Jiraiya muttered, completely taken aback. Dead, yeah, you're not wrong. I'm not even a part of this dimension anymore, but that is far beside the point. I was sent by Kami to destroy the evil of this world, allowing the good to start anew. Naruto explained, but that sounds like what Akatsuki is doing. They planned to destroy the world, Jiraiya countered. It was a point he'd tried to make twice now, however the goals of that group were different from what Kami had actually planned. It is similar, however we plan to spare people, and those we spare will be moved before we destroy their villages. Select villagers from each country and ninja will be allowed to live. Those who are evil or corrupt will perish. Tsunade supplied, and why do you need me? Jiraiya asked. He wasn't as much of a fool as they took him to be. He was aware that his survival served a purpose, rather than his godson wanting his presence. You are a very good spy. We need someone like that on our side so that we do not make any mistakes. I am not one for killing innocents. If we had a way of making sure that those who have done no harm are out of the way, we can proceed without hindrance. Naruto stepped forward. In some way he hoped that by making Jiraiya an espada he'd be able to disguise himself even after the change. However, as he was able to make his own espada, he should be able to grant that ability. I will change you to one of us. You will continue to work as you had before, however if you're caught return to us. Naruto instructed before placing his hand on Jiraiya's forehead, channeling his Ryatsu through his hand as he did for Tsunade, and watched as it overtook his godfather. Jiraiya's hair changed from white to black, growing spikier than it had been. The mask over his face resembled that of a toad's, and his clothing stayed the same style, however they lost all their color. His body shape changed from that of an older man to one the same age as Tsunade, lean but still strong in stature. His skin was pale, and Naruto knew that his hollow hole was on his right shoulder. His sword emerged a moment later, needing to be maneuvered out from behind the clothing. It was a shorter kodachi with a green scabbard and a round hilt guard. One more moment and I will have that mask off. Where do you want your number? You will know what your sword is called within your being. It is a part of you. It is a gauge of your power. Naruto spoke while Jiraiya thought for a moment and pointed to the center of his chest. Naruto nodded and placed the 9 there. He removed his mask with a piece staying around his chin to find a much younger and more handsome version of his former self. His skin had no blemishes whatsoever, while his eyes held no wrinkles or bags. Satoru, Jiraiya spoke, placing his sword on his belt. Well, Jiraiya, I think that's the best you've ever looked. Tsunade chuckled and held up a small mirror. Holy hell, Gaki. Jiraiya spoke, his voice deep and resounding. It wasn't hard to see that whatever Naruto had done, it had made him young again. Don't let Orochimaru hear about this. Jiraiya spoke before becoming serious. What are you going to do about my former teammate? He asked, knowing that there was a plan there. Taunt him, then kill him. I want him to know that not only did his former teammates achieve eternal youth, but that he never would. Naruto shrugged, which earned a nod from Jiraiya. Makes sense. The evil snake needs to be eradicated. Is that what you plan on doing next? He is our next target, that is correct. As of now, Akatsuki pose little threat. They will be suffering from the loss of their 2 men, and at not having achieved their goal, I have no need to take them out currently. Orochimaru has been a thorn in our side since before I was even born. It is due time we removed it. Naruto nodded, shifting back into Ulquiorra. He untied his godfather, who released his soul sword and used its illusionary abilities to change his appearance back to what it had been before. I will continue my work as well as keep you posted on information I gather. Thank you for your second chance. Jiraiya nodded. My sensitive inner self felt that while you were not present in my life, for long you helped as much in your own way. You were the teacher I did not have in Konoha. As such, you were more useful to me than most others. Ulquiorra spoke emotionlessly, but Jiraiya knew not to look a gift horse in the mouth. It was as much of a compliment as he would get from this form. With a nod, he popped out of the room, making sure to grab the attention of some prowling Konoha spies as he did. Tsunade did her part of waving love struck out the window, as if Jiraiya had spent the afternoon with an adoring lady. As if anyone would sleep with him knowing his reputation. Anyone who actually knows him is aware that he has no game with women. She chuckled to herself. Are we prepared to meet your former friend? Ulquiorra inquired, getting a snort from Tsunade. He was never my friend, nor was he a teammate. Let's go kill that son of a bitch, she replied, getting a nod from her master. They entered a garganta and emerged in a forest with extraordinarily large trees. His presence is underground, fitting for a snake, trash that he is. Ulquiorra informed Tsunade, who could also sense him. What do you say we lure him out? It would be easier to take him out without needing to go through a maze to find him. Tsunade offered. Ulquiorra said nothing. He did, however, raise his hand up and point to a spot on the ground before firing off a Zero. In doing so, within moments shinobi flooded the area, prepared for an attack. You will dispatch this trash. I will find Orochimaru. Ulquiorra spoke, using his Sunido to get away from the rest of the battles. Ulquiorra could sense the snake Sannin approach long before even the animals still in the forest could, and knew that he was inspecting him closely. I have heard much about you and your little group. I was hoping to use one of you as a test subject. You'll do nicely. The older man hissed, his voice soft and creepy sounding. You will not have the opportunity. This will be short. Ulquiorra responded. He used his Sunido to quickly get within arm's reach of the Sannin, who was temporarily surprised by the sheer speed of his opponent. I didn't think he'd be that quick. Damn you, Sasuke. If I had you now, this would be an easy battle. The Sannin cursed, barely dodging away in time. It had been a while since he'd last needed to shed his skin, and he'd hoped to not need it for this battle, but with the prowess his opponent was showing, it was a solid possibility. I have not needed to use this blade on my enemies for a long time. Enter Kusanagi. The Sannin chuckled, acting as if it were an advantage. What he didn't realize was that even though the Kusanagi blade was said to be one of the strongest, with the ability to cut almost anything, Ulquiorra's Hyro was strong enough to be left unaffected. You are nothing but trash. Ulquiorra charged a Zero quickly, firing it at the snake before getting in close with his Sunido. He wished to finish the fight quickly. However, Orochimaru was proving to be a tougher opponent than the last 2 he'd fought. Pulling Murcielago off of his belt, he released it with enclose. This caused his Riatsu to spike exponentially, making the snake Sannin pause in his attempts to attack. Whatever it was you just did, how is it possible for you to continue to grow stronger? Orochimaru demanded. I was not using my full ability to begin with. Be honored, as only one has survived this form. Ulquiorra spoke, referring back to Ichigo, who defeated him. Ulquiorra's mask had completed its helmet form on his head, with 2 horns standing on either side. His black wings had emerged from his back even as his clothing had repaired on his body. His black hair hung past his waist, wilder than before. His resurrection was complete. I will be honored to experiment with your deceased body. The snake yelled out before summoning a large snake into the forest. It was longer than 100 meters at the very least and wider than even some of the trees in the forest surrounding them. Manda, I have new prey for you. Subdue that winged man. The crazy man shouted, launching his attack at Ulquira, who seemed unfazed by the huge snake. He dodged to the side of the strike from Manda, using his wings to take to the air and staying just above reach of the snake. Green rain permeated the area, as his Riatsu was even heavier in his released form. I do not have time to trifle with you. Ulquira spoke, forming a Luz de la Luna in his hand and throwing it, followed in quick succession with 5 more, to pin the snake to the forest floor. Orochimaru at this point had been charging a large earth-style jutsu, of which Ulquira cared little for the name of. He dodged the wall of rock and dirt that rose up to meet him, and while Manda was released from his summons almost as quickly as he'd come, Ulquira swooped down to throw another attack at the pale-skinned man. The Luz de la Luna he'd charged went straight through Orochimaru's stomach, which bled for a moment before regenerating by use of multiple small white snakes. If I keep having to regenerate from his attacks, I'll run low on chakra and healing abilities. I have to get rid of this man. Orochimaru prepared another attack when Ulquira paused. It was in that moment that Orochimaru knew he'd be hard-pressed to win this fight. As Ulquira ran his finger along his blade, drawing a small amount of black blood into his hand, he pointed his injured finger at Orochimaru and spoke 2 quiet words, "Ciro Oscuras." As the words were heard by the older shinobi, he realized he had no chance of dodging the rapid and almost instantaneous black and green laser. It struck his body, decimating a majority of it, however leaving his head intact. As he started to regenerate once again, he attempted to regurgitate a new body, however the process was stopped by Ulquira, who appeared next to him. Your way of fighting is appalling. You do not attempt to attack head-on, however choosing to attack using almost underhanded means, and if countered, you reform and attempt again. Such weak means would never defeat me. You cannot ever achieve eternal life. Ulquira spoke, allowing a small fraction of his fellow Espada to leak into his mannerisms. What could you possibly know about eternal life? Orochimaru cried out, his body struggling to maintain its regeneration. I have achieved it as well as your former teammates. They pledged to work on my side and have been rewarded justly. Isn't that correct, Tsunade? Ulquira asked his partner, who had arrived moments later, covered in blood. How has it been, Orochi team? Tsunade mocked him, not bothering to hide the fact that she was no longer the ninja he knew. It can't be you, Tsunade. How could you get eternal life and power, and I am reduced to this? Orochimaru nearly shrieked. He couldn't believe his eyes, but the young woman in front of him was clearly Tsunade. She did not look as she used to, with slight enough variations where if it hadn't been pointed out to him that she was his fellow Sannin, he wouldn't have outright guessed it. Because you sought power via subjugation. You sought to take over everything you could in your lust for power and knowledge. You were no longer human. Tsunade growled, stomping down onto his chest, feeling the satisfying cracks of his ribs. I will give you the honor of killing him. He is yours. Ulquira stepped back. Killing gave him no pleasure. Nothing in the world did, however he knew it would give his partner closure. Tsunade nodded before drawing Meru. Dance, she spoke softly. Once drawn, the power she released took the form of what had once been her yin seal releasing. The mask piece on her face completed itself once again, following the swirls of its former ability. This covered her body, down her arms and over her chest and stomach. Over her hands it formed a pair of fingerless gloves. I do not take pleasure in killing you, Orochimaru. You were once my teammate, someone I spent many hours with. Now you are a power-hungry fool who will die for his wrongdoings. Goodbye, she spoke before thrusting her hand down through his heart and ripping it from his chest. It took a moment for him to realize it was impossible for him to regenerate. In her released form, her Riatsu was potent to those who she believed deserved to die. As such, her Riatsu bonded with his body on contact and poisoned his chakra. As it flooded his system, he was being killed from the inside. Tsunade's Meru could also be used to heal, a factor she found she was happy to still have even after her change. She could be of great use to Ulquira and whoever else he deemed worthy of becoming an Espada. Should I collect his head? Tsunade asked while Ulquira shook his head. He had resealed his own Murcielago as she was killing the other Sannin. No. His sword will be enough, burn it. He turned away and surveyed the damage done to the forest and surrounding area. You left none alive, Ulquira asked. None, they were all corrupt and evil, working for this man. Tsunade sighed. It would be different once they had information on more of the villages from Jiraiya. They wouldn't have to blindly search through people. What is our goal now? Orochimaru has been taken care of along with his known associates. Tsunade asked, glancing at her master. She knew she might not get an answer from him, as he was not a man to make idle conversation to fill silence. If he did not have a plan, he would not tell her one. Rather, he created a garganta and stepped into it, waiting for her to follow after him. She did so without question. However, when it opened in Suna, she was concerned for their identities. I must speak with Gaara, was all he said on the matter before they were accepted into the hidden village with open arms. You took out Orochimaru and all of O. Kenkuro burst out as soon as Tsunade had finished explaining. He was a thorn, he needed to be removed. Ulquira would have shrugged if he were any other Espada. Gaara simply nodded, obviously deep in thought. Have you mentioned to any other Konoha shinobi about our alliance? Tsunade asked, having been briefed on the dealings between Suna and her master. We have had one team from Konoha return here within the last week. They did ask about our alliance with your group, stating that you were causing problems for the village and that we were to distance ourselves from you. Is that true? Temari asked in response. You know of our goal. The only disturbance we have caused is bringing Jiraiya and Tsunade on our side and decimating Orochimaru and the 2 members of Akatsuki. However, our plans will cause them problems. Ulquira agreed. Gaara, I would like to offer you a position within the Espada. You may refuse, however your power and alliance is important to our success. Tsunade spoke, extending the offer towards the Kazekage. Ulquira had already informed her about his plan to bring him into the Espada, not only because of how close he was to Naruto in his previous life, but how strong he was. I will have to refuse for the moment. I am needed here, however there will come a time when I will accept your offer. Gaara gave them both a small smile before standing from his seat. I appreciate you coming here to inform us of your plans and your achievements thus far. I will help Jiraiya Dono with whatever he needs once he arrives here. Until then. Gaara shook both of their hands before the two left his office. What do you say to returning to Konoha for a brief period of time? Ulquira asked Tsunade, who seemed hesitant. I would rather not return, however I know of your intentions to begin breaking down the village from the inside out. Let's go back. She nodded. The two of them had no need to rush there, as the village would not fall without them, so they took a much more leisurely walk. How do you fire a Zero? Tsunade asked, breaking the silence. Ulquira shifted to Tyr, knowing it would be easier to talk for longer that way. Build the Riatsu into your hand, much like you would chakra. Zero requires more strength to use than Bala. Bala is a concentrated burst, a burst in the shape of a ball. Start with a Bala and then try a Zero. Tyr instructed, standing off to the side. Tsunade did as she was instructed, gathering the necessary Riatsu. A purple ball of energy formed in her hand and she shot it at a tree nearby. The trunk burst into splinters upon contact, with the rest crashing down towards them. Tyr pulled Tiburon from its sheath, revealing that it did not have a middle section but only the edges. She sliced down tree apart as it fell, not at all concerned. Good. Try with the Zero, Tyr informed her before helping adjust and aim the attack. A few more attempts and Tsunade mastered the abilities she'd asked about, knowing that to fire a Grand Ray Zero, she would need to draw her sword and cut her hand for it. Tsunade thought that was best left for another time. The walk was calming, helping both the Espada to gather their thoughts on how to handle Konoha. There were people that Ulquira, as he'd taken over again, wished to save, however not make Espada. Because of Kami's order to restart the elemental nations as better than they were now, he knew he would have to leave some of his former allies in the village human. Uruka and Enko were 2 of these people. Uruka he'd considered making an Espada, however in some way he knew that the life of an Espada would not suit the gentle-minded Chunin. Enko, by comparison, was considered, however shut down because of her own secret-caring nature. When Naruto had been alive, the snake-wielding special Jounin had taken Naruto under her wing a few times, teaching him how to survive in the wild, as well as how to put on a show for the village. She taught him how to blend into the crowd as best as the pariah of the village could. Tsunade, however, was dreading the trip back, since having been cast out as the Hokage, and since Shizune was forced to stay behind in the village to help at the hospital, she'd cut almost all ties. It was only that of her former companion that she kept, however even then it did not hold much. She'd never considered going back, hoping that Shizune would leave of her own volition. She was nervous if she were to be honest with herself. This was an enemy village now, no longer the home she knew. As the forest grew familiar to both Espada, the comfortable silence grew tense. If they recognize us, or me at least, Tsunade asked, if they somehow manage, however unlikely, we will kill them. Ulquira responded without hesitation, and if it is someone we wish to keep. She continued asking, hoping that she wouldn't need to kill someone she might care for. Words will be exchanged then. Character cannot be judged on children. The people we will keep to replenish the nations will have to prove character once more. He answered, considering his words more carefully. The gates appeared in the distance, and a shred of nerves emerged in Ulquira's stomach. A quick reassessment of their purpose in the village quashed those emotions, however he could not shake the notion of having had them. The boy's old personality is bleeding far too much into my own. I will need to remedy this, he thought, stealing all emotions once more. The sight before him was one that he'd never seen before. The gates were closed, without any sign of opening for them. At the gate stood two familiar faces, however aged. However probable the chances of Akamaru sensing and avoiding my insects is slim to none. A monotone voice spoke. You don't know that. The only reason your bugs haven't gone after Akamaru is because you respect me, shouted the other guardian. Respect is a strong word. This elicited a growl from the hot-tempered of the two. Is that Kiba and Shina? They've grown, Tsunade asked quietly, earning a small nod from Ulquira. Akamaru sensed them first through his superior sense of smell. Almost immediately, Kiba turned towards his companion then where he was looking. Stop, who are you? Why are you here? Shino asked, straightening his jacket from where Kiba had been gripping it. I am Kaori. This is my partner Ulquira. We wish to speak with your leader. Tsunade stepped forward, giving her alias. Kiba's eyes went wide in recognition. The two at the gate had been warned about a woman in white with white hair and a sword. She had taken Jiraiya of the Sannin captive. Where are you keeping Jiraiya? Kiba demanded. We do not have him. I spoke with him briefly regarding this village and its people. He was allowed to leave. Ulquira replied in his usual monotone voice. You have been placed in our bingo book. You can teleport. And you took out 2 of the Akatsuki members. Kiba spoke, not in anger but awe. I was not aware that speaking to a man with knowledge on the village we were traveling towards would warrant being placed in your bingo book. Tsunade spoke, acting as the unawares foreigner for the sake of her alias. Internally, Grimmjow was impressed with her ability to act the part and lie so easily to a former teammate's face. Your abilities make you enemies, according to our Hawkage. I think they are cool. Kiba grinned. Your vests designate you as Chunin, however you are left to guard the gate. Ulquira asked, his memory of the other 2 gatekeepers returning. We are sympathizers of the demon boy, the one who was murdered here 3 years ago, because we still feel he was unjustly killed. However, we are part of the stronger generation. They cannot strip us of our chakra. We are reduced to gate duty to be out of the way. Shino replied while Kiba grit his teeth. It was obvious that the 2 disliked their jobs, and to Tsunade it was a sad sight. We wish to speak with your leader. If the white-haired man named Kakashi has returned, he will have spoken of us to him. Ulquira replied, preparing to enter the village. We need to see some papers first. Kiba sighed. We do not have any. We are not from your world. Ulquira pulled his hands from his pockets. Tsunade was prepared to butt in should it be needed. However, it was obvious that Shino had a similar personality to Ulquira and knew how to deal with his teammate. This world, how are you not from this world? Kiba demanded. Kiba, that is unimportant. They are known to our Hawkage. Shino spoke, stepping slightly in front of his teammate. We are not living beings as you are, human trash. Ulquira replied, earning a sigh from Tsunade, who stepped in. We are from another continent far from here. Our physical makeup is much different from yours due to the harsh conditions of our home. We do not call ourselves human. She explained in the most vague yet explanatory way she could think of. Ulquira gave her a look that spoke of conversations later. However, they were allowed entrance to the village. You are to go straight to our Hawkage, nowhere else unless granted access. Shino opened the gate, and Tsunade had her first view back into the village that raised her. The buildings were dark and looked as though they were covered in burn marks and soot, while smoke rose from large factory-like buildings that had not been there before. None of the old civilian shops stood. However, many places were handing out ninja supplies, obviously mass-produced, to the teams that would walk by. The village looked less friendly, and everyone walked with their heads down. It was heartbreaking. This was why Ulquira was revived, to fix the mistakes that had been made. The Hawkage Tower was where it stood before, however a large banner hung from the window. It spoke of the true power of ninja, total submission. We must have our meeting and get out, I do not like this place. Tsunade spoke in a hushed tone. Ulquiorra had no outward reaction, however deep inside, all of his parts combined to form Naruto once more. He felt the sadness and anger that his current form would not show. We will remedy this error. Ulquiorra looked at Tsunade, and for the first time she saw an emotion in his eyes. Rage, yes we will. She nodded in affirmation, and led the way through to where the secretary was holding others. I have received word from the gate that important visitors have arrived. They take precedence over any other meetings until the Hawkage sees fit. Please see yourselves out. The woman was shouting to be heard. She was the new secretary, as the old one had had a mental breakdown within a year of Danzo taking over, and the second one after her had broken the one rule: do not speak of the demon boy. Satsuki was determined to keep her role as secretary as long as she could, not because she respected the new ways of the village, but because she would not be allowed to leave the village if she were to be placed on a team. Her ideals were too strongly for reformation of the current ways. She knew that Danzo was keeping her close because he knew she could change a lot for the ways of the Konoha people. Satsuki was outspoken in the academy, having graduated a year before and receiving a field promotion to Chunin. She was strong, however her ideals set her behind her classmates. She did not conform to Danzo's idea of a village, much like the older generations. Thus he kept her close and watched her every move. "Are you the guests?" she asked, glancing the pair up and down. The woman was beautiful in a dark and mysterious way. Her face was lain with a white lace mask over the right side of her deep amber eyes and blonde, almost white hair. Her body was lean but muscular, with a begrudgingly larger chest than Satsuki's. The other foreigner, a moderately tall man with black shaggy hair and pale skin, caught her attention immediately. He looked bored on immediate inspection, his expression set on narrowed eyes and a small frown. However, she realized he was glancing around critically, taking in the sight of the office as if he did not trust it. Right away, Satsuki knew that this pair was not there to work for Konoha. They were meeting out of necessity, not want. "I will take your names down and the Hawkage will see you." She spoke, spitting the word Hawkage out. She did not respect Danzo in the slightest and did not mind the newcomers knowing as such. The female raised an eyebrow and glanced at her partner. "I am Kaori." She spoke, her voice a pretty tone. "Ulquiorra," the man spoke, his voice smooth and deep. Satsuki nodded and pressed the buzzer on the desk. "The two guests from the gate have arrived." She spoke, "Send them in." Danzo's voice sent a chill through Tsunade's spine. He sounded different, and it was alarming. They were ushered into the room next to the desk and almost immediately greeted with the sight of Kakashi's team. "I see you have decided to visit our village. Good to see." Kakashi commented with an eye smile, earning a small indiscernible shudder from Tsunade. "This is the man you were speaking of before, Kakashi. He does not look like much," Danzo commented, facing them. He looked slightly younger than before, if that were possible, but the look in his eye was what caught Tsunade. His thirst for power had always been great, but the hunger hadn't been sedated after taking over Konoha. That much was obvious. "I came to inform the leader of this village of the death of one Orochimaru." Ulquiorra spoke, earning a quick glance from Tsunade. There was a barely visible reaction from Danzo in the form of his eyes narrowing. "And how did the old snake meet his demise, if I might ask?" the Warhawk asked, his voice uncaring. "By my hand. I tore his beating heart from his chest while poisoning his blood. He could not regenerate." Tsunade asked, earning her first glance from Kakashi and his team. "And who are you?" "You are not the companion he had before." She had shorter blonde hair. Kakashi asked, looking her up and down in a less than pleasant way. "I am Kaori." His former companion returned to Huanko Mundo. She was not needed here for the meantime. Tsunade glanced over the team, finding her eyes landing on Sasuke. Out of the group, he was the one who seemed to have changed the most. He was looking at Ulquiorra while the rest of the team was looking at her. "And it was you who landed the killing blow on Orochimaru. How are we to know for certain if you do not bring me proof?" Danzo demanded. "Because we do not answer to this village, or any for that matter." I presented his sword to the Kazekage, who awarded us his bounty. "It was only for convenience did we come to Konoha." Ulquiorra spoke in return, knowing that Tsunade would not have done so in a neutral manner. "We are the greatest ninja village in the elemental nations. It is prudent that we are given information regarding any and all variants from our village first." Danzo ground out, obviously angry. "As my partner stated, we are not part of this village, nor was his base close to Konoha." We presented our evidence to the closest village, which was Suna. Tsunade answered, reining in her urge to maim the current Hawkage. Are you here to join Konoha if you have not joined with Suna? Sakura asked, pride in her voice. No. How are you going to operate if not connected to a village then? Sai asked, adding a voice to the conversation for the first time. On our own terms, our mission is for us alone. Ulquira regarded Sai once more, not remembering him from Konoha previous to his death. He looked to be the same age as Sakura and Sasuke, however he seemed to be about as emotionless as Ulquira himself. And what is your mission? Sakura asked in a mocking tone. A growl almost arose through Ulquira's throat, had he not forced it down with whatever will he had. Many of his aspects despised how she spoke to him, however it was Tsunade who surprised him most. Vengeance. After getting mixed reactions to her very straightforward answer, including shock, fear, indifference, and suspicion, Tsunade and her companion were gifted with passes that would allow them to tour the village and 2 coupons for a discounted hotel stay. I would like to inform you that certain locations within the village are off limits to the average populace. Travelers and civilians are not allowed within these areas. I would press you further on what you mean by vengeance, however I do not wish to put a strain on a potential trade partner. I would like to be able to meet with the leader of your village soon to discuss a partnership. Danzo smirked. While the old man had been plotting to lure the newcomers into a false sense of security, they were not so easily fooled. The leader of our village is no longer available. I am the only one you will speak with regarding trade. We do not have anything to trade with your village as we do not produce anything of our own. Ulquira responded, his voice neutral, however the look in his eyes spoke of pain to any who would argue. While the discussion was in progress, Sasuke glanced between the companions. The blonde one was new and looked nothing like that one he'd met outside of the village. She did, however, look familiar for some reason, but he couldn't put his finger on it. What do you mean you have nothing to trade? You must give something in order to receive help from us. You are aware of that, correct? Sakura demanded, a smirk on her face. When did we say we wished for your help? Our only business here is to provide you with the information we have willingly given and to visit. Our business is elsewhere. Tsunade snorted, giving Sakura a small glare. If that is all we will discuss with this meeting, I see no point in continuing. Ulquira spoke with a tone that suggested it wasn't to be ignored. Tsunade nodded and the pair prepared to leave. Once they were outside the door, Sasuke stood up. I'll escort them around the village. Some of the areas they can't go aren't labeled as they should be. Sasuke volunteered, gaining the attention of his Hawkage. That is a noble idea. Be sure to keep an eye on any suspicious behavior of theirs. Danzo commented, waving the boy out. I was not aware that we needed an escort. Ulquira said neutrally, not against the company from the boy. It will keep him from sending ANBU agents after us. He believes I'm loyal enough to be trusted without question, usually. Sasuke spoke, jumping ahead of them and walking at a slightly brisk pace. It wasn't long before the threesome ran into more of the former members of the Rookie Nine. Kiba and Shino were given a reprieve from their gate duty and joined the mysterious pair and their escort on the tour. It became apparent to Ulquira that Sasuke was a much more welcome member of their generation than he was years before. The other group, ones that were not brainwashed by Danzo, were actually friendly and nice to him, rather than annoyed or brisk. From what I'd heard about you, not many thought you were friendly. Most spoke about how you never spoke and never attempted to care about clients and your missions. Ulquira mused out loud to the Uchiha, who bristled slightly. It's not that I don't care, it's the opposite really. I care so much more than my teammates or Kakashi for that matter. All they see is another mission for the greatest village ever, while I see so many more people who need help. If it weren't for the fact that I have to keep an image, I'd have started to show how I really feel more. Sasuke answered with a small glare at the ground. It's true, you know. He had to join my team for a mission once, and it was probably the most enlightening moment I've had. Realizing that team here actually has a heart was a big surprise. Kiba laughed and jabbed his elbow into Sasuke's side as the black-haired boy punched his perceived friend in the arm. Shino was as stoic as usual. It appears as if the death of our friend caused a small change in all of us. We are still grieving him, although we sometimes believe we are the only ones. Shino sighed. Tsunade glanced at Ulquira to gauge a reaction, before sighing as he was as stoic-faced as ever. Who else has cared for the Uzumaki boy? He was the village pariah, was he not? Tsunade asked, leading the conversation towards one of the goals they had discussed. While it was too soon to act on the idea of transitioning their chosen Espada allies, it would be good to spread the word of their vengeance and retribution within the circles of those they trust. The rookies do. It isn't a surprise, really. While most of us admittedly found him slightly annoying, he was also someone we looked up to. He was never down, at least not around us, and he always worked hard. Kiba thought for a moment. Neji was skeptical at first, as well known, he needed to be convinced that it was not his fate. Ino-san was difficult as well, due to her previous friendship with Sakura-san. Shikamaru was able to speak with her, otherwise most of us are saddened by his death. Shino answered in finer detail, "Is it all your generation?" The older members of your village did not care for the boy. Ulquira prompted, his voice neutral, however the many aspects of his being were reeling. Most that were open with their emotions and personality were debating, revealing who they were talking to at that moment. The logical members of the group were discussing how best to rip the rug out from under Konoha and its corrupt government. So far, that weird snake using Jonin, Uruka-sensei from the academy, the family who runs the ramen shop, most of the Jonin-senseis other than Kakashi, some of the villagers as well, but it's hard to give specifics. Kiba shrugged. "You both seem to be really interested in Naruto. Why do you care so much?" Sasuke asked, growing suspicious about the two foreigners. Tsunade felt a small flutter in her stomach, knowing that they were growing closer to revealing their true intentions than she'd hoped they would so soon. "The Uzumaki boy is the reason we are here. This village has committed a great sin by causing his untimely death. We are here to rectify its mistakes." Ulquira answered, keeping his answer vague on just how. "How is it that you knew Naruto?" Kiba asked, picking up on what Sasuke was leading to. "I knew him personally, however Ulquira has a more personal connection to him. It is not an easy conversation, nor one we wish to have within the confines of this village. We plan to inform you of these details, however it will be a mission we will pay your village for. It will pull you from the village, while still allowing you to act within the will of the village, all under the premise of the betterment of the village." Tsunade answered, her face easily showing the group that she was sad by the topic. "How did you know him, though?" Sasuke pressed, wanting to know more about his teammate's life before he died. Tsunade felt bad about hiding her true self from those who once saw her as a leader, even if it was only a small amount of time. Ulquira glanced at Tsunade before allowing a small puff of air leave his lips. "If you wish to speak your mind, you may. Any other details will wait." Ulquira spoke, turning to his partner. She gave him a look before pausing and glancing around. Using her pesquisa, which Ulquira trained her in, she sensed that other than civilians, there were no other ninja within hearing distance. If there were, Ulquira would not have allowed her to tell the ninja in front of her what was going on. It was easy to see that the boys they were with were waiting with barely contained anticipation. "I want you all to listen to what I have to say with an open mind. It will be easier to explain the rest of the details later, after we commission some of your ninja. I must say it is good to see you three again, though. It has been some time." Tsunade started, hoping that the brighter of the two ninja would piece some of what she was saying together. "I won't come outright with telling you who I am, but Kaori is not my real name. I was once a ninja of this village, however I can't say I am a ninja anymore. Nor am I human for that matter, but that's a different story. I'm rambling now." Tsunade realized that no matter how prepared she was to tell them, it was hard to do it in a way that wasn't obvious. "When I came to the village, I was only here for a short time, but Naruto's death hit me very hard. I saw him as a son, I still do." She spoke, and in that moment Sasuke and Shino pieced together who she was. "You how what?" Sasuke stuttered out, realizing that he was looking at Tsunade Senju of the Sannin. Not to say that she did not resemble how she used to look, however the youthfulness, never to say that word in any of its forms out loud lest they summon either green monster of her face, and the features she now sported suggested she'd gone through a great change. "How is this possible, Tsunade-sama?" Shino asked, his voice hushed. "It was Ulquira-san who brought me out of my self-pity. While we are speaking within the village, I would prefer to be called Kaori. It would keep my identity well hidden." Tsunade smiled sadly. "Are we to assume that because you are speaking to us with regards to further information and plans, we are instrumental to said operation?" Shino asked, piecing all of the information together better than the other two teens did. "Yes. For now that is all we can tell you. It must be kept a secret until further notice can be given. As of now, we have enough money to commission the former Rookie 9 members who are not brainwashed by this village. It will have to be systematic, as we cannot let on to the fact that we are working against them, you see." Tsunade nodded as they continued walking through the village. It was easy to see how far it had fallen by the poverty levels of some of the civilians, as well as the amount of smog within the air surrounding the once healthy and clean village. I plan to put in the start of the missions this week. I will make sure that I request Mr. Uchiha, due to his elite capabilities as a ninja, that he should help another group with their given task. This will eliminate the need to request Kakashi and the rest of his team. Ulquiorra spoke, giving Sasuke a good idea of what to expect. I'll be waiting to hear. Sasuke nodded before realizing that they'd come up to one of the better hotels in Konoha. The place that our Hokage gave you is one of the hotels that deals with the shadier business in Konoha. It isn't a great place to stay either because ANBU are always crawling through there. This is much better. It's private and run by a man who doesn't really agree with the Hokage. Due to that, though he doesn't get a lot of business, it has less traffic. Sasuke explained before allowing Tsunade and her ever-mysterious partner to speak with the front desk regarding a room. We will reconvene at another point in time with more information, I promise. Thank you for being open-minded about this whole thing. Tsunade bowed to the three boys, Kiba, who was still in such shock that he had no words to say, Shino, who nodded, and Sasuke, who seemed to be lost within his own thoughts again. You will hear from us within the week. Ulquiorra gave a small bow before turning away and leading his partner up the stairs to their room. Sasuke was at a small loss. Not only had Tsunade showed back up in their lives, in quite the twist at that, but she had information regarding Naruto that they had never been told before. It wasn't long after his death that news of his status as a former Jinchuriki surfaced, which caused some turmoil within the younger ranks, as they realized the exact reason he was hated by many of the adults around them growing up. It also led many of them to see him in a different light, away from the annoying loudmouthed kid who always played pranks. They saw a boy who hid his pain behind laughter and worked hard to prove he was worth the time to get to know. What more do you think they will tell us? Kiba asked, moving away from the hotel with the other two boys. I believe it would be a bad idea to speculate too much, as there is a chance that we could be entirely off base. Shino countered logically. I think it has to do with Naruto. They asked about him so much and even brought her back to the village. I think we will be told more about him, information we never got. Sasuke answered, his voice hushed. We will have to see. Shino nodded. Should we tell the others? They deserve to know. Kiba looked between Sasuke and Shino with an apprehensive look on his face. I think we should tell only those we know will not speak of it. Shikamaru and Hinata for sure. They won't say a word, but it is prudent that we have more of us knowing at least a little of what is happening. Sasuke nodded while Shino didn't say anything more. You find where Hinata is, guys. She is your partner, while I'll go find Shikamaru. I have a good idea of where he is. Sasuke directed, splitting them up to make up for lost time. When we all have a chance to meet with them and find more information, we'll get back together as a group and talk about it. Shino nodded and directed Kiba to follow him while Sasuke took off, using the rooftops to quickly reach the Nara household. Before he could get there, however, he was stopped by one of the Hokage's personal route ANBU. Uchiha-san, Danzo-sama wishes to speak with you about your findings of the foreigners he is curious about. The ANBU spoke, emotionless and cold. All right. I do not wish to take long. I have a meeting to uphold with Shikamaru regarding a jutsu he told me about. Sasuke lied, knowing that to the corrupt members of the village he was still seeking power from more jutsus. Of course, was all he heard before he was taken into the office once again. Sasuke-kun, please sit. I would like to hear what you have to tell me. Danzo said, an ugly spark in his eyes. I am content to stand. I do have to say that I was unable to ascertain many details of the two. They were quite content to not speak while I was showing them the village. The only conversation they had was in regards to commissioning some of our ninja. They did not give any further details. I was able to discover that they did not have what we know to be chakra. The two of them are not ninja. Sasuke gave his information, keeping it brief and to the point, as Danzo knows him to do in his reports. I see. Well, that is a disappointment. No matter, they will reveal more information to us in due time. You may leave. Danzo waved him out, which caused a small sigh of relief to leave Sasuke's lips. He didn't want to admit that he was nervous to meet with the village leader, especially when he did not care for him. Thank you, sir. He bowed and left, hightailing it to Shikamaru's once he was outside of the building and away from prying eyes. The Nara family lived close to the forest due to their affinity to shadows, but also because they tended to the deer population that took up residence near the village. They were on the outskirts of the village limits, which made their home hard to stumble one. This was a perfect location to meet with the lazy Chunin due to its seclusion. Why hello there, Sasuke-kun, good to see you. How can I help you? Yashino Nara, Shikamaru's mother, greeted him at the door. He'd taken to visiting her lazy son, as they were some of the only people in the village who did not dislike Naruto, and as such they worked together on a few missions, where Sasuke had to pull the lazy boy out of his home. I am here to see Shikamaru. Yashino-san, is he home? Sasuke spoke politely, showing once again that he was not the same boy as 3 years prior. Of course, he's out back by the river. She allowed him through, to which he bowed politely and entered. Shikamaru. Sasuke-kun is here to see you again. She shouted out the back of the house. I can find him from here, thank you. Sasuke smiled and continued out, glad that Yashino liked him well enough to allow him through without question. What do you need now? How was the meeting with the two foreign ninja? Shikamaru asked from his perch on the bench. If anyone else had asked me that, I'd have worried about how they knew. I have news, big news. You can't tell anyone, not even your father, this. Sasuke spoke, shaking his head. It wasn't surprising that Shikamaru knew, as his father was still one of the few Jonin that Danzo knew he needed to keep around from the old regime. He was the best strategist in the village, a feature Danzo couldn't get rid of. So, Shikamaru sat up, his full attention on Sasuke. It was rare that something got the normally subdued boy worked up the way he was. The two foreigners aren't ninja. They don't have any chakra, but one of them revealed who she was to Shino, Kiba, and I, which is why it's to be kept secret. Sasuke sat down before breathing out slowly. Tsunade of the Sannin is back in the village as one of the foreigners. Somehow she changed her entire physical composition to look entirely different, as well as change how she is. She said as a bit of a mumbled comment that she wasn't human anymore. Something big is going on with these two, especially if she is one of them. According to one of them, they plan to commission the rookies who don't hate Naruto for a mission that would be strictly informational. We'd be paid to work with them against the village, is what I'm gathering. You cannot speak of this to anyone until we know who can be trusted. Sasuke blurted out. Shikamaru took a moment to take stock of everything that had just come out of Sasuke's mouth before his own fell open slightly. I don't know what to say about this. It's going to be interesting to see what they have to say. Damn, life just got even more troublesome.